for Anxiety and OCD, episode 24. Today on the show, Bailee Teter comes on to discuss Equine Assisted Therapy. You even get to hear a little story about how I overcame my own horse phobia that I had developed from a bad horseback riding experience as an adolescent. Without further ado, here is our interview. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Texas. I moved to Nashville in 2014. I came here to go to Lipscomb to complete my master's in clinical counseling, and ended up meeting my husband here, and so I stayed. We really love where we are, and our church community has been such a blessing to us, so we really love it.
That's awesome.
So, fun fact, aside from equine counseling or equine assisted counseling, I also direct a Christian dance program. So when people ask me what my job is, I'm like, well, I work with horses and I teach dance classes.
Those are two pretty unique interests.
Yeah, they're not anything I would have ever planned for myself. If somebody would have told me, like in 2016, in the future, you'll be directing a dance program and doing equine assisted counseling, I would have been like really stressed out about how to make it happen and really confused because I've danced my whole life, but I did not grow up with horses. And so before I started working as an equine assisted counselor, I didn't really have much background with horses. So that's been a really cool story in and of itself.
Yeah, tell us how you got on that track, because when people go to graduate school for counseling, obviously there's a lot of different places that they can take that. And so how did you get into the equine assisted route?
Well, I didn't go to school for equine assisted.
Sure.
I actually have a really big heart for using creativity to help people heal and help people grow. Someday, like a long-term dream of mine is to have my own organization that helps people connect to God through creative outlets, and then through that come to healing. And so in the counseling program, I did my specialization in play therapy. So we did toys and sand tray and creative arts and music, and all of these things were my electives in the counseling program. And after school, I worked for a community mental health organization for a year and a half, and I was really burned out. It was hard for me to be in an office. It was hard for me to be sitting still. I felt really isolated. Didn't feel like I had a lot of support just where I was. I was contracted into a school. And so I was at the school, but not part of the school. I learned a lot. I worked with a lot of different ages of kids and teens and a lot of different things about case management too. But it was not the place for me. I am not an office person, which you can see that now by the jobs that I have. So I had contact with a professor from Lipscomb, and he knew for probably about 6 months that I was just really unhappy, and I was searching and I was praying a lot, like, Lord, what are my options? Like, where do I go from here? I don't even know if I like counseling. Like, I just did this degree and now I'm confused and really burned out. And after about 6 months, one day he was just like, you know what? You need to go meet my friend. She's interested in art and she does something with horses. And I was like, okay. So I went out to Unbridled Changes, is where we are in Goodlettsville. And I observed 2 days of sessions. And she, at the end, Dawn, who's the other therapist out there, was like, well, if your professor trusts you, I'm really good friends with him. I trust you. You want to join us?
Wow.
And that was that.
That's amazing networking right there. I love it when that works out.
Yeah. And I feel like I'm not a good networker. So that was all God.
That was God. Yeah. I know for me, like when I've been in certain environments, whether it's counseling or other things, and maybe you're not this intuitive, but maybe you are, like, was there a feeling or a sense, like when you went to Unbridled Changes, like, oh, like almost like I can breathe, like this is where my soul is meant to be?
Yeah, definitely. Every time I drive over the hill, when you get there, like we're at the end of a hill, we're not far off of Long Hollow Pike, but every time I drive over that hill and you just see, I think there's about 50 acres of fields and horses. It's just like, oh, I'm here. Like, It's a peaceful place. All of the staff members are believers. And so there's just this like connection. We all have that fundamental similarity, even though we will see clients, like anybody, we'll see clients that are not necessarily Christian, and we respect where they're coming from and their stories. But just having that as like the core, there's a piece for sure on the property, and the horses add a big part to that for sure.
That's awesome. So tell us, for those who don't know, which is probably a lot of our listeners haven't had interactions with equine assisted therapy, what does that look like?
Yeah, part of the story where I got involved too, I did not have to be a horse person to do this type of therapy. There's different models. I am trained in EAGALA, which is Equine Assisted Growth and Learning Association. There are a few different models. I think one is called PATH, where they do therapeutic riding, where the people ride the horses. And there's some just different versions out there. But through EAGALA, you have an equine specialist and you have a mental health person. And I'm the mental health certified person. And so I did my training with another girl who's an equine specialist. And to do that, she had to have over 6,000 hours of working with horses and the horse background and all knowing their personalities and their behavior. And so we work together in all of our sessions, and clients keep their feet on the ground. And very rarely do we teach them like any kind of horsemanship. Sometimes, like in our program or for me, we'll step outside of the EAGALA model and teach just a little bit of horsemanship so the kids or the adults will feel a little bit more comfortable. But usually we keep our feet on the ground and let the horses have free rein to interact with the clients however they want to. There's actually some research that has come out, I think probably in the last 10 years. And the most recent article I saw was 2017. It was some preliminary research about something called coupling, where horse heart rates and human heart rates will start to mirror each other when they're in close proximity. And so there was one research that had 3 different scenarios. In this situation where the horse's heart rate was closest to the human was when the horse had free rein in the situation. They weren't being restrained. They weren't behind a bar. Like they had free rein and they could choose to come and interact with the person. And so that's kind of how a lot of our situations go. We'll bring a horse in to the arena. We'll have a client create something out of props or toys. Kind of very common one early on is show me what it feels like to be you. And so they'll build something out of toys or props or different things. And then we'll kind of watch the horse. And a lot of times that horse will approach like as they're building and show curiosity and show like their sensitivity to what's going on with the person. But horses are used more. Well, the reason horses are so effective is because they're naturally prey animals in the wild. So like a dog, if it gets scared or if it gets hurt, it'll fight back. A horse usually won't. It'll run.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. They are so sensitive to their environment, and they're so sensitive to whatever is going on that when they look at a human, they expect the human to kind of be, quote unquote, the predator. And so they're sensitive to what's going on with people. And so if you come in showing a lot of anxiety or carrying a lot of anxiety, even if another person could look at you and not tell, the horse can tell. And the horse will respond to you differently, whether you've got anxiety, depression, trauma, like they can pick up on some of those things.
That creeps me out a little bit. So if you go in there and you're anxious, does the horse like run from you, or is the horse kind of like a little more empathetic than that?
I would say it depends on the horse.
Okay.
It wouldn't necessarily run. Usually what we've noticed is it will kind of, put its head up, or it'll be on alert a little bit, but in coordination with the counseling, we'll say, can you go help that horse be calm? And so as the person is trying to help the horse calm down, they essentially calm themselves down as well. And just that connection with the horse to the human, you're able to see, it's like an externalization of whatever's going on inside your heart. The horse will kind of act on it.
Wow.
But some of them are just really empathetic and can tell, especially the ones we've used a long time for therapy. They'll they'll be gentler.
I'm sure there's a selection process that goes into which horses would be good therapeutically versus not, that's already been done by the organization.
Yeah. Igala's model is that any kind of horse could be used for therapy. The horses that we use, most of them are all natural Tennessee walking horses because the farm is also like a breeding farm. We have 25 to 30 horses, but also the equine specialist, that's kind of their job to be able to know horse personality, which ones are sensitive to the weather, which ones are sensitive to kids versus adults. And yeah, we choose which one we think would work best.
Do people usually work with the same horse over time, or do they work with different horses kind of depending on what their needs are?
That depends on the person too and the situation. So I have one client who she is really, really connected with a specific horse. And so every time she comes, she at least has a little bit of time to spend with that horse. She just feels really comforted by this horse, really safe with this horse. So even if we have her doing something in a different field or we have her doing something in the arena, she'll always at least get a few minutes with this one particular horse. And a few weeks ago, she came and that horse, I actually got a little nervous because the horse was just like laying on the ground. And I was like, oh no, is the horse okay? But it was just kind of a calm day. And usually if you approach a horse that's laying down, it'll get up, kind of that prey instinct as well. But this woman was having kind of a rough week. So she was feeling overwhelmed. She was feeling like there was a lot going on, but she's so connected to this horse. She walked over there. The horse looked at her and then laid its head back down. And so she crouched down next to the horse and it was just like petting it and stroking it. And when she came back, she was like, wow, I feel so much better. I feel so much calmer here.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting too, because I've looked into other kinds of therapy that use animals, like animal assisted therapy with dogs or things of that nature. And sometimes people talk to their animals, and I have cats and I talk to my cats sometimes. I like to think we have little conversations, but there's something about this sense of like being in the presence of an animal. And now that I'm doing more telehealth therapy, I'm doing all telehealth therapy right now, there's something about people having their animals in session too that's really powerful, like that certain level of comfort or draw that they can get from that. And I wonder if that's a part of this equation too. A lot of times people who have challenges in their relationships, they feel like they can connect to animals more easily than the other people around them.
Yeah, I can definitely see that because animals don't judge us. And they hold secrets very well. We've told clients multiple times, if you feel like you can't tell us something, you can go tell the horse because they keep secrets really well.
Yeah.
So I definitely think there's something to that relationship between human and animals. I mean, God created it that way, like even in the beginning, he said, take care of the animals,
Yeah. So
there's a special connection there.
Your horses are fully HIPAA compliant.
Yes, definitely. They don't tell the secrets, they keep them.
Yeah. What are some of the issues that you see people coming in with? Obviously, this is a show focused on anxiety and OCD, so feel free to speak to that. But I'm sure there are a variety of issues that people seek equine assisted therapy for.
Yeah. Anxiety is a big one for sure. And just the nature of being outside in creation without the constant barrage of information and technology and in a new environment, like I think the environment in itself helps reduce anxiety and then along with the horses. So we do get quite a bit of anxiety, trauma, depression. I've been there for about 2 years. In the past 2 years, we've had kids that come with like sensory issues that are also just looking for ways to cope with a lot of that, and getting to touch the horses and feel the ground and smell the smells, like that is just really beneficial for them. Relationship things, family conflict, adjustment, just a big variety. Kind of anything you would see a regular therapist for, equine would work for as well.
I've always thought for myself that I should, at some point or another, pursue equine therapy because I don't have a positive relationship with horses. And I
Uh-oh.
thought maybe I should try to improve my horse relationships at some level. I was scared, absolutely somewhat terrified of horses for many years. Not that I had to be around them, so it didn't cause problems in my life enough to go to therapy over it. But I had a traumatic horseback riding experience when I was 16 years old, and basically was just kind of thrown on a horse, and it was like, hey, pull the reins this way to go right, this way to go left, pull back and say, whoa, if you need to stop. And that was pretty much my horse instruction. There was no, let's walk around the corral a little bit or anything of that nature. And the horse took off just running because there was a break in between us and the next trail horse. And they were kind of trained to fill in the gaps. So that's what the horse was doing, just filling in the gap. And I was, of course, very anxious and screaming, whoa, because that was the only thing I was taught, right? Like, whoa, and I'm bouncing on the horse. And I get off of there and I was like, I don't like this. I'm never riding a horse again. This was an awful experience, blah, 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 blah. And so I always try to push myself a little bit to do things because I feel like I'm always asking my clients to be brave and to try new things and to step outside of their comfort zone. So about a couple years ago, I was taking a day off and I decided to go to Land Between the Lakes. You ever been to Land Between the Lakes? It is a
I have.
beautiful
It's
area.
beautiful.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, it's just this big like park area on the border of Kentucky and Tennessee. And they have all kinds of things. They have a place where you can drive through and see buffalo, and that was super cool. And they have a planetarium and tons of hiking trails. So I saw that they had this little sign that said horseback riding. And I had absolutely no plans to go horseback riding, but I thought, well, here's your opportunity to get over your fear of horses, and you should just go in here. Don't give yourself time to talk out of it. Like, just get over there and talk to the people. So I explained to them, I said, look, this was my experience. I had a very traumatic horse experience, but I'd like to go horseback riding. And they said, this horse is so old, it will not run. Like, it's not even gonna gallop on you. It just walks through the woods. It's very relaxing. And I was the only person, I guess, because it was a weekday and I was the only person on the trail ride with the trail guide. And so I made friends with the horse before I got on, and I worked through my fear of horses. So now I guess I don't need to go to equine. But yeah, I've always had, I think, a curiosity or an interest in it. And I think a lot of people don't really realize that this is an opportunity for them. I would say, especially if someone has been through a lot of talk therapy where they have a hard time maybe articulating or opening up about things. Do you feel like pursuing these more creative approaches to therapy is like a good avenue or a good route to try?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember in grad school, I don't even remember exactly which project it was, but it was in research class. And as a dancer, I've always been interested in the way that creativity impacts our brains and our emotional well-being. And I feel like that we are more like God when we are creating than any other time. And so I did some research on just, research articles and looking up things. And there were some studies, I think, that came out of somewhere in Europe that said our brain's connection when we are doing experiential therapy is so different than when we do talk therapy, especially because we have learned how to build up barriers and convince ourselves how to answer and respond to things in very structured and safe ways when we use our words. But when we use art, when we use toys, when we do sand tray, when we're moving, even being active like with the horses, experientially, our bodies are processing things and our minds are processing things that bypasses the language part of our brain. And so I definitely think that any kind of experiential therapy is helpful when people kind of get to a stuck place in therapy, or if they just want to try something different. I think that equine is really helpful in combination with talk therapy. I kind of do a mix of both in my sessions. And I know that we've had therapists bring their clients out to the farm to do 1 or 2 off sessions with us just to gather more information or to gain more awareness for the client.
That's an interesting route too. I hadn't really thought of that as an option.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if someone is looking for equine assisted therapy, what do they need to look for? What kind of training would you recommend that they search for?
Yeah, so I think I mentioned earlier, I know of at least 2 different types of equine assisted therapy, and one is EGALA, which is what I'm trained in. The other one is PATH. They're both therapeutic. PATH is therapeutic riding. So you get on the horse, you're engaging the horse, a little bit probably what you did when you went to Land Between the Lakes. Building that bond, that relationship with the horse. There's a really cool book that I read a couple of years ago. I think it's called Hope Rising. And it's just stories about kids somewhere in the Northwest who they came out of a traumatic situation and they were paired with a horse who came out of a traumatic situation, and they learned and they became friends with each other and they grew, and it was horsemanship. And so that was a very unique thing in that situation. So there's a lot of benefit to therapeutic horsemanship, I think, like learning how to walk a horse, how to ride a horse, how to train a horse. But what I do is not horsemanship. We let like I said earlier, we let the horses just be free and interact on their own accord. So I think you would want to determine what you're looking for in equine assisted therapy. Primarily, if you're looking for counseling, you want to make sure that you have a credentialed counselor, somebody that knows what they're doing and what they're talking about. I would say somebody that aligns with your beliefs. If you want a Christian therapist, you can find Christian equine therapists. You can find, people that are marriage specific. Like there's a variety around Nashville. There's really quite a few. But then make sure that the people that you're working with are also credentialed or trained with a specific program, because you wouldn't want to just show up to somebody's house and you brush their horse and they call it therapy, and it's not really therapy. So you want to just check their background, their resources. And I would say too, like making sure that the horses are treated ethically, because if you've got a location that's got 1 or 2 horses and they're seeing 20 clients a week, that's not going to be good for the horse's well-being. They get burned out too. They give a lot in a session. Like we have quite a few that they have been so involved deeply in sessions that when we are finished with them, we have to tell the other therapists, like, this horse needs a break. They're done for the day. So having like a variety of horses or just a plan in place for if the horses get burned out. That's part of the equine specialist job, is to look out for the well-being of the horses. So.
That's awesome. That's really neat. It's cool that they have that emotional connection and they get worn out as well. And then they need a rest.
Yes, they sure do. Yes, they sure do. We've had some really, really cool sessions of just the horses feeling so much of what's going on inside these people that they're just kind of, I'm thinking of one specific incident. We had a kid whose family was going through a lot of changes, a lot of chaos. There was some addiction involved. And the kid kept telling me, I'm fine. I'm fine. And we were just like, there's no way you're fine. Like, it's that language setting up that barrier. And we brought in the specific horse. And typically we don't tell clients the horse's names, but because we don't want them to have preconceived notions, we let them pick names themselves. But I'll tell you the horse's name to make the story easier to understand.
That's interesting.
But we brought in John Henry. Yeah, it's because if you have like a best friend that's named something, and then we tell you that that horse has your best friend's name, it might change the way you view the horse. And we want them to be as blank of a canvas as they can be, at least in the beginning, so that we can put our own expectations and our own projections onto the horse and deal with it that way. Like we've had people call a horse, that horse is called math, that one is English, that one is social studies, like, and work it out that way because they're struggling in one of those subjects. So there's so many different ways that you can do it. But this specific incident I'm thinking of, this kid kept telling us he was fine. And his mom was like, I'm just not sure he's fine. Like there's so much going on. And we brought John Henry into the arena and something happened, but John Henry started running in circles. He started bucking, throwing his head around, like just huffing and puffing and snorting. And this is a big horse. Like when he stands up on his hind legs, like he is tall. And after he kind of calmed down, we looked at that kid and we said, well, what do you think about that? And he was like, had his arms crossed and he kind of had his brow furrowed and he was like, nothing, I don't feel anything. And we were like, but you reacted, like your body reacted. We can see that you reacted. And so that was a place where we were able to start getting some of those, like, we specifically noticed this happened or you reacted this way. Even though his words didn't want to tell us, something was going on in his heart. And eventually it came to that, like, the way that horse was acting represented how he felt inside.
Wow. That's so neat. That's really cool.
Yeah.
It's almost like the horse gave him a language that he didn't have, like to give.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other stories or things that you wanted to share about how you've seen equine assisted therapy be helpful for people with anxiety?
Yeah. I had a couple that kind of came to mind when I thought of this question. Another John Henry story. He's a really good therapy horse. He's actually had some traumatic experiences, and so he is very in tune with people. I think they say that horses will either go to the extreme where they're like really not interested in people, not interested in anything, or they will become really gentle and really sensitive. So he's a really sensitive horse. So one of my very first sessions was actually with the kid who was experiencing a lot of anxiety and irritability, but he was nonverbal. And so his parents brought him, they were just hoping that something more hands-on and something more natural would be helpful for him. And so my equine specialist at the time, she gets John Henry because we're like, well, we know he's a pretty good horse, like with kids. And she had him on a rope because she was a little nervous about how the kid would respond. So usually we let them go free, but she kind of had him. She was sort of controlling the situation. And we were trying to get the kid, hey, come pet the horse, come pet the horse, come see the, like, no response from him at all. He completely ignored us, sat down on the ground and started building piles of dirt. And we were like, okay, this is not going how we expected it to go. And John Henry is pulling at the rope and acting kind of irritable, kind of crazy. There was like a few cats around and they were just like meowing. Like there was just a lot of chaos in the situation. And I told my equine specialist, I said, how about you just let him off the rope and see what happens? She was like, well, are you sure? We're like, yeah, let's just let him off. And so she let him off and he made a beeline for the kid, like kind of quick. And then he slowed down until he got to a really gentle last step right up behind the kid and put his mouth down to the kid's head. And when he touched the kid on the head, the little kid turned around and looked right at John Henry. And that was the first interaction of anything in his environment we had seen him do besides the dirt. So for the rest of this session, that kid would play in the dirt a little bit and then turn around and like look at the horse. And if he moved, John Henry would move and he would stay right there with him. And at one point, the kid became really fascinated with this horse's feet, which most horse professionals would be like, don't get near the feet, don't get near the feet. And so my equine specialist got a little nervous, but then she noticed that horse wasn't moving a single muscle. He was so aware that this kid was by his feet. He was so aware of what was going on with the kid, like that he was totally still. And just after that, like the kid started opening up more, started interacting with us more. We got more eye contact. His parents said he was less anxious at home. So that was a really sweet one, just because it's kind of unique in that he wasn't verbal. And so he couldn't do talk therapy. And so using the horses and using the environment was really cool. And then I had another one. Let's see. So I had one. Well, I was thinking of two, actually. We have time to say two more? A little shorter.
Sure.
Okay. These are a little shorter. That first one was a little long. So I remember this client, she was in her mid-20s. She came from a really chaotic home environment, had a lot of trauma, anxiety, and depression, including some suicidal ideation. And she had tried talk therapy, really didn't connect with her therapist, was not a good situation. So she came out to see us. And so we invited her to spend a few minutes outside with the horses. Just a lot of times we'll say, go make friends with the horses, or go just figure out what it means to be still with horses. Depending on what the people bring, we'll give them a prompt and send them out into the field with horses. And this time we just said, what does it mean for your heart to be at rest? Like, what does it mean for that anxiety to come down and that depression to like release? And she stayed out there for, 10 to 15 minutes. And she came back and her face looked completely different. And she had spent a lot of time with a specific horse. And I was like, so what did you learn? And she was like, well, I realized like, I don't have to work so hard. I don't have to fight all the time. Like these horses, I enjoy their company just because they're here. And they enjoy mine just because I'm here. Like I have value because I exist. And that was just like such a light bulb moment for her. And like just totally shifted her perspective of herself and of her value in the world. And then another one was a woman who was about 40, and she had walked through a season with miscarriage and just had a lot going on, grief, anxiety in relation to like what would happen in the future, like just a lot of baggage that comes with that as well. And so we gave her the prompt to just go see where she feels like she can actually connect, like which horse she feels connected to. And she ended up really spending a lot of time with one of my favorites, and her name is Gypsy. And the woman came back and she was telling us about why she felt like she connected with Gypsy, and she just felt so much calmer when she was with her, and like the horse could really understand her. And she spent some time talking to the horse. We don't know what she said, but Gypsy, HIPAA compliant, she keeps her secrets. But she was just out there for a while. And she was telling us all these things and telling us about her season of the miscarriage. And I was actually able to share in that moment that Gypsy had also had a miscarriage. And with that, like the client, like she just started crying, and she was like, I knew there was something. She understands me. So after that, each time she came back, she would just feel really connected to Gypsy and did a lot of work with that horse.
So cool. That's so cool. Towards the end of every podcast, I like to ask the guests to share a story of hope, which is a time that you received hope from God or another person.
Yeah, could talk about this all day.
It's a good topic.
Yeah, it really is. And especially for the time that we're in right now, I feel like hope is elusive to some people. But for me, I feel like it has been such an anchor. My hope, it's definitely in the Lord. But in the dance program I teach, I get to write a spiritual curriculum each year. And I felt like this year, the Lord put on my heart the theme to be the promises of God, and just took that scripture from Hebrews 6, where God makes a promise to Abraham, and he's like, I will bless you and I'll give you many descendants. And it says that God had nothing bigger to swear by, so he made an oath on his own name. And it says when God makes a promise, he cannot break it, he cannot lie. And because of that, like it gives us strength because we can trust that he is who he says he is. Like that hope is an anchor for our soul. And so I always just I picture that as like putting my heart on something that's stable rather than on like the world around me. And I felt like that was so important for me in this past year because everything, I mean, it's the story of everything in 2020. Everything has shown to be shakeable. You know, the world has been completely shaken. Everything has been ripped out from underneath us. Like things have changed. People have died. Like there's so much. But I want my students to know, like the reason we focus on this, I want my students to know that God is so firm. And that's where I've really found my hope. Like when he says he will bring all things under his rule, and he will renew heaven and earth. Like he's not joking. He's not playing games. Like his word is secure. Like I've seen God do many things, transform lives, speak identity. I serve on a prayer team at my church too, and just seeing him work in that. But as I was thinking about this, I thought of just this cool concept. I had my first garden this past year, and it was a total experiment. I was like, I don't know if this is going to work. I don't think I have enough sunshine, but here we go. And it was abundant. I had so many cucumbers that I didn't even eat them. Like it was amazing. And so I'm planning for my next year. And last week I was doing some garden prep. So do you know what one of the best fertilizers for a garden is?
Is it horse manure?
It is.
Oh, wow.
It is.
That's because they eat so well, right?
Yeah, all the grass. Yep. So a couple of weekends ago, I got it from a place in town in Nashville, and I went over and got buckets full of manure, transport in my car. I don't have a truck. And I came and I was like spreading it out all over my garden and just in preparation for this next season. And then it was just, God was just teaching me more through this, and that like, you know, I work with horses all the time and we get the good parts of them. We see the way that they interact. We see their hearts. We see their compassion. But the manure is kind of gross. Like the poop is gross. Like clients don't like to walk around. They're like, ew, it's horse poop. And I'm like, well, it's part of having a horse. Like there's some gross parts.
Sure.
And then planting my garden, what I wanted was those gross parts, because that's what eventually will break down, and out of that becomes beautiful things. And so just like the Lord takes our broken stuff and he brings redemption and beauty out of broken things, is just the way the garden works. You know, come this fall or come this spring and summer, out of that horse manure will be grown seeds of nourishment and beauty. And that's just been really hopeful for me. If nothing, like I feel like God is a God of redemption.
Yes.
He brings beauty out of brokenness. And so, yeah, just thinking like using horse manure to bring beauty in a garden, that's just given me some hope recently.
I love that. That's really what the show's all about, is giving people hope and seeing that God can take the hard parts of our story and the painful things and make something beautiful out of it. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah, he totally can.
Sharing all that. This has been inspirational, but also so informative. There were so many just different little nuggets that you got to share with us that I really enjoyed.
Well, thank you for having me. It's so fun to get to talk about it. I love what I do, and I know a lot of people don't really understand it, so it's fun to get to explain a little bit more in detail.
Awesome. I love having these types of interviews on the show because we're all about increasing hope here. And if you found that one particular type of counseling didn't work for you, or you feel like, I don't know that I could do the whole talking thing, or that's not a good fit for my child, this might be something to look into as an option. We have some exciting interviews coming up on the podcast, as well as a very special Mother's Day edition. Next week, I will be discussing a giveaway in honor of our 25th episode, so make sure that you stay tuned for that as well. I'm also asking you to save the date of May 15th. We are going to have our very first webinar on reducing shame. So what I'm hoping to do through these webinars is have a little bit more of a time for me to present some information as well as have follow-up question and answers. Or if you have questions about shame that you would like me to address during the webinar, I certainly can do that. Please feel free to send those questions through our website contact form at www.hopeforanxietyandocd.com. And we will see you on the webinar at 10 a.m. Central Time on May 15th. As always, thank you so much for listening. Hope for Anxiety and OCD is a production of By the Well Counseling in Smyrna, Tennessee. Our original music is by Brandon Maingram, and audio editing was completed by Benjamin Bynum. Until next time, may you be comforted by God's great love for you.